The day my daughter invited me over for what she called an important family discussion, something inside me tightened. It wasn't fear. Not yet. It was that strange feeling only mothers understand. The quiet warning that settles deep in your chest before life changes forever. I almost called to cancel. For reasons I couldn't explain, every instinct told me not to go. But she was my daughter. When your child says they need you, you don't ask questions. You just show up. If only I had known what was waiting on the other side of that front door. I might have turned the car around. Lauren opened the door before I even knocked. "Hi, Mom." She smiled. At least, she tried to. It was the kind of smile people wear when they're already thinking about something else. I hugged her. She barely hugged me back. That was the first thing that felt wrong. The second was the silence. Normally, my grandchildren would come running through the hallway, laughing, arguing over toys, asking if Grandma had brought cookies. Today, nothing. The house felt unnaturally quiet, almost staged. "Where are the kids?" I asked as I stepped inside. Lauren slipped my coat onto the rack. "Ethan took them downstairs to play." Something in her voice sounded rehearsed, as though she'd already practiced that answer. I nodded anyway. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe. She led me toward the dining room. The moment I walked in, I stopped. Everything had been arranged with unsettling precision. 3 chairs, 3 glasses of water, a laptop already open, a thick blue folder sitting perfectly in the center of the table. It didn't look like a family lunch. It looked like a business meeting. Or worse, an intervention. Ethan stood as I entered. "Good to see you, Margaret." He shook my hand. My hand. Not a hug. Not even the usual smile. Just a handshake. That was when the uneasy feeling in my chest grew stronger. Lauren pulled out a chair. "Mom, sit down." There was no warmth in her voice. Only urgency. I sat slowly, placing my purse beside my chair. For a moment nobody spoke. Ethan looked at Lauren. Lauren looked at the folder. Then, she slid it toward me. "We've been planning our future." She paused. "And we've reached a decision. We wanted your opinion. We wanted to ask you something." A decision. My decision had apparently already been made. I frowned. "I'm sorry. What exactly is this?" Lauren opened the folder. The first page showed mortgage numbers. The second, home renovation estimates. The furniture catalogs. Kitchen upgrades. Landscaping costs. Every page highlighted. Every dollar carefully calculated. Weeks of planning. Maybe months. I kept turning pages. The deeper I looked, the colder I felt. Then Lauren pointed to one number highlighted in yellow. "This," she said quietly, "is where your retirement comes in." I looked at her, then back at the paper, then at her again. "I'm sorry. I don't think I heard you correctly." Ethan leaned forward with the calm confidence of a man who believed logic could solve anything. "We've run the numbers several times." He turned the page. "If you contribute about 85% of your retirement savings, we can finally buy the house we've always wanted." He smiled. "As you can see, it's the smartest solution for everyone." Everyone. Such a small word. Yet somehow, it didn't seem to include me. For several seconds, I honestly thought they were joking. I even waited for one of them to laugh. Neither did. Instead, Lauren folded her hands together. "You've always said family comes first." She looked me straight in the eyes. "So this is your chance to prove it." Something inside me cracked. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like old glass finally giving way after years of pressure. I spent nearly 40 years working for those savings. Double shifts. Missed holidays. Old clothes instead of new ones. Vacations postponed year after year. Every sacrifice had one purpose. To make sure that when I grew old, I would never become someone else's burden. Now, my own daughter was looking at those same savings, as if they were already hers. I swallowed hard. "And what happens to me?" Lauren frowned. "What do you mean?" "If I get sick. If I need surgery. If something happens 5 years from now. How do I pay for that?" She exchanged a quick glance with Ethan. Then she shrugged. "We're leaving you 15%. 15%. She said it so casually, as though she were discussing leftovers after dinner. Then she smiled. What more could you possibly need? I stared at her. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking at my little girl anymore. I was looking at someone who had already spent my future, without ever asking if it belonged to her. And somehow, I had the sinking feeling that this wasn't even the worst part, because the biggest betrayal was still waiting for me. I couldn't take my eyes off the folder. Page after page, every dollar I had spent a lifetime saving already had a destination. Closing costs, a custom kitchen, new hardwood floors, a finished basement, even landscaping. Every dream they had for their new home had been carefully planned. Using my money, not one had anyone planned for my future. I slowly closed the folder and rested both hands on top of it. The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the kitchen clock. Finally, I looked at Lauren. So, you've already decided where my retirement belongs? Lauren didn't answer right away. She looked at Ethan first. He gave her a small nod. Only then did she speak. We're not taking it from you, Mom. We're investing it. I almost laughed. Investing? She nodded confidently. In our family's future. Our children will finally have a backyard. They'll grow up in a better neighborhood. You'll come over every weekend. It'll be your legacy. Legacy. That single word hit me harder than anything else she'd said. For years, I thought my legacy would be the values I taught my daughter, the sacrifices I made, the nights I worked overtime so she could go to college, the example I tried to set. Apparently, my legacy had become granite countertops and a 3-car garage. Ethan slid another document toward me. This is the lender's paperwork. We've already spoken with them. They're just waiting for your signature. My eyes drifted to the bottom of the page. There it was. A blank line. Waiting for my name. It looked harmless. Just ink on paper. But I knew that one signature could erase 40 years of careful planning. I didn't reach for the pen. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. What if I say no? Neither of them answered. Not immediately. Lauren's expression slowly changed. The warmth disappeared from her face. I don't understand why you would. I asked. What if I say no? She crossed her arms. After everything we've talked about, it would mean you don't believe in us. There it was. Not a request. Not a conversation. Guilt. Wrapped inside disappointment. Before I could respond, Ethan jumped in. No one's forcing you. His voice stayed calm. Almost comforting. We're simply asking you to do what any loving parent would. I looked at him for several seconds. Then something strange occurred to me. For the last 15 minutes, every sentence had started the same way. Our future. Our children. Our home. Our dreams. Not one. Not a single time had either of them asked, "What do you want, Mom?" A faint laugh drifted in from the basement. I turned toward the hallway. My youngest grandson was sitting on the floor at the bottom of the stairs. He was stacking wooden blocks into a tiny tower. Every now and then, he looked upstairs. He didn't understand the words, but children always understand the feeling. He knew something wasn't right. And suddenly, I wondered what he was learning from all this. That love means giving people whatever they ask for? That grandparents exist to solve everyone else's problems? Or that if you want something badly enough, you can pressure the people who love you until they give in? The thought broke my heart. I turned back toward Lauren. When your father was dying, my voice came out quieter than I expected. I made him a promise. Lauren looked up. I promised him I'd never become a burden to anyone. For the first time, neither she nor Ethan interrupted me. I worked double shifts. I missed birthdays. I wore the same winter coat for 12 years. I skipped vacations. I saved every extra dollar. You know why? Lauren lowered her eyes. So one day, you'd never have to worry about taking care of me. She swallowed. Mom. That's different. I slowly shook my head. No, it isn't. Silence settled over the room. But this time, it felt different. Lauren looked uncertain. For just a second, I saw something I hadn't seen all afternoon. Doubt. It disappeared almost as quickly as it came. Because Ethan leaned forward again. Let's not make this emotional. It's only a financial decision. I looked him straight in the eye. No. It stopped being about money the moment you planned my future without asking me. His jaw tightened. Neither of us looked away. I stood up. The chair scraped softly across the hardwood floor. Lauren looked surprised. Mom. Picked up my purse, closed the folder, and gently pushed it back across the table. I need time. Ethan frowned. The lender is expecting an answer tomorrow. Then they'll have to wait. Lauren's voice became sharper. If we lose this house. I raised my hand. Not angrily. Just enough to stop her. If you lose this house. It won't be because I said no. It'll be because you bought a house you couldn't afford without someone else's retirement. Neither of them spoke. Not this time. I walked toward the front door. Lauren followed behind me. Mom. There was desperation in her voice now. Please don't overthink this. I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. Then I looked back one last time. You know what's strange? She frowned. I've spent this entire afternoon answering questions about your future. I opened the door. And neither of you has asked a single question about mine. I stepped outside. The cool evening air hit my face. For the first time since arriving, I could finally breathe. As I walked toward my car, I had no idea whether I was driving away from my daughter or from the version of myself who had never learned how to say no. Either way, one thing had become painfully clear. This conversation was far from over. The moment my car pulled away from Lauren's house, I turned off the radio. I didn't want music. I didn't want silence either. But silence was all I had. Street after street passed in a blur. Red lights. Green lights. People walking their dogs. Children riding bicycles. The whole world kept moving, as if nothing had happened, while my own world had quietly fallen apart. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. One question kept repeating in my mind. When had my daughter stopped seeing me as her mother and started seeing me as a solution? I searched my memory, trying to find the moment everything changed. Maybe it hadn't happened all at once. Maybe it happened so slowly. I never noticed. The first memory came back. Lauren was 22. She had just started her first job. One evening she called me in tears. Mom, everyone at work drives nice cars. I looked so embarrassing. I smiled at the memory. She'd wanted a brand new SUV, the kind no young professional actually needed. I convinced her to buy a reliable used car instead. Then, without telling anyone, I paid half the cost. She hugged me so tightly that day. Thank you, Mom. I'll never forget this. 4 years. I believed she meant it. Another memory followed. College tuition. She'd wanted to finish her degree without taking student loans. I quietly withdrew money from my savings. Not because I had plenty, because I couldn't bear the thought of her beginning adult life drowning in debt. She graduated smiling. I cried harder than she did. It was one of the proudest days of my life. And I'd do it again. Then came the furnace. Then daycare. Then unexpected medical bills. Then home repairs. Every emergency ended with the same phone call. Mom. I hate asking. That sentence always worked. Because she knew. Before she even finished talking, I'd already said yes. I never kept track of the money. Parents aren't accountants. Love doesn't keep receipts. But somewhere along the way, something invisible had changed. The words thank you slowly disappeared. They became, you don't mind, right? Then, we really need this. Eventually, they became, we already made plans. The realization hit me so suddenly, I had to pull the car onto the side of the road. I sat there, watching people drive past. None of them knew an old woman was sitting alone, trying to figure out whether she'd spent years raising a daughter, or years teaching someone that she'd always say yes. There was a painful difference between those two things, and I had only just begun to understand it. Nearly 20 minutes later, I finally pulled into my driveway. The little brick house looked exactly as it always had. Simple, quiet, comfortable. No grand entrance. No luxury kitchen. No expensive landscaping. Just home. I stood there for a long moment before unlocking the front door. The familiar scent of old wood and fresh lavender welcomed me. For the first time all day, I felt safe. I slowly walked through each room. The hallway, the kitchen, the living room. Every corner held a memory. Near the pantry, there were still tiny pencil marks hidden behind the doorframe. Lauren's height. Age 6. Age 7. Age 8. I traced my fingers over the faded lines. I remembered how excited she used to be every birthday. Did I grow, Mom? You always grow, I'd tell her. Back then, growing meant becoming taller. I never imagined growing older could sometimes mean growing farther apart. The dining table caught my attention next. It was scratched in dozens of places. Most people would have replaced it years ago. I never could. That table had witnessed homework, birthday cakes, Christmas dinners, late-night conversations after her father died. Some furniture becomes part of the family. This table had earned that place. I rested my hand on it. Then I whispered something I never thought I'd have to say. I miss who we used to be. The empty room offered no answer. I walked into my bedroom and knelt beside the closet. Hidden behind a stack of blankets sat a small fireproof box. I unlocked it. Inside, everything was exactly where I'd left it. Retirement statements, insurance papers, investment records, my will. Every document represented another year of hard work, another sacrifice, another promise I'd made to myself. I picked up the folder slowly. For the first time, it didn't feel like paperwork. It felt like my entire life. Then, a memory surfaced. Years ago, my financial advisor had smiled at me during one of our yearly meetings. Before I left, she'd said something that seemed almost unnecessary. Margaret, protect your independence just as carefully as you protect your money. One usually disappears before the other. Back then, I laughed. I don't have children who'd ever put me in that position. Today, those words echoed through my empty bedroom. And for the first time, they terrified me. My phone suddenly buzzed on the nightstand. Lauren. I stared at the screen. It rang until it stopped. A text arrived seconds later. Mom, don't overthink today. Ethan thinks once we explain everything again, you'll understand. I read it twice. Not once did she ask, "Are you okay?" Not once did she ask, "Did I hurt you?" Only another reminder that they still believed this conversation wasn't over. I quietly placed the phone face down. No reply. Not today. Maybe not tomorrow. Rain began tapping softly against the windows. I made myself a cup of tea, wrapped both hands around the warm mug, and sat beside the living room window, watching the rain. People think betrayal arrives like thunder. Loud, violent, impossible to ignore. But real betrayal is quieter than that. It arrives wearing a familiar face, calls itself love, calls itself family. Then, little by little, it convinces you to hand over pieces of yourself, until one day, you barely recognize what's left. I closed my eyes, took a slow breath, and made the first decision that truly belonged to me in years. Tomorrow, before I spoke to my daughter again, I was going to speak to someone who had no reason to manipulate me. Someone who understood the law better than guilt. Because deep inside, a question had begun to haunt me. What if this wasn't just a family disagreement? What if it had already become something much more dangerous? I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same image. That folder, page after page. Every dream my daughter wanted to build, paid for with the life I'd spent 40 years creating. At exactly 5:47 that morning, I gave up trying to sleep. The house was silent. I walked into the kitchen and switched on the coffee maker. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was beginning to brighten. Normally, mornings had always been my favorite part of the day. Today, they felt different, like the beginning of something I couldn't stop. Coffee in hand, I sat at the dining table. My eyes drifted toward an old photograph hanging on the wall. It was taken 25 years earlier. Lauren was 10, missing one front tooth, laughing so hard she could barely stand still. Her father stood beside her, one arm wrapped around both of us. For a moment, I forgot everything that had happened. Then my phone buzzed. Lauren. Again. I let it ring. Seconds later, another call. This time, Ethan. I ignored that one too. Before I could set my phone down, a message appeared. Mom, please answer. The lender is asking questions we weren't expecting. I froze. The lender? I hadn't spoken to any lender. I hadn't called anyone. So what? Were they suddenly asking questions? Another message arrived before I had time to think. Please don't make this harder than it already is. Harder? I wasn't the one trying to spend someone else's retirement. For the first time, something felt wrong. Not emotionally. Legally. I stood so quickly my chair nearly tipped over. If no one had contacted the bank, then why were they panicking? The question refused to leave my mind. There was only one way to find out. An hour later, I was driving downtown. Not toward Lauren's house. Not toward the mortgage company. Toward someone whose advice couldn't be influenced by family. Daniel Brooks. The name had been sitting in an old address book for almost 30 years. My late husband had written it down after a coworker recommended him. We'll probably never need a lawyer. He'd laughed. Funny how life waits until you believe you're safe. Daniel's office wasn't impressive. No marble floors. No expensive artwork. Just shelves overflowing with law books. Family photographs. And a coffee mug that read, "Read the fine print." For the first time that morning, I almost smiled. A few minutes later, a silver-haired man stepped into the waiting room. "Mrs. Carter?" I stood. He shook my hand warmly. "I'm Daniel Brooks. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." There was something calming about him. He didn't seem interested in rushing or judging. He simply listened. For nearly 30 minutes, I told him everything. The invitation, the folder, the mortgage, the 85%, the pressure, the signature. I expected him to interrupt. He never did. Instead, he kept writing small notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finally finished, he closed the notebook, folded his hands together, and asked one simple question. "Mrs. Carter, have you signed anything for your daughter during the past year?" I frowned. "No." Then I paused. "Well, maybe one thing." His expression sharpened. "What was it?" I searched my memory. "Last winter, I signed a limited power of attorney. It was only supposed to help if I became sick or ended up in the hospital. I didn't think much of it." Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he held out his hand. "May I see it?" I opened my briefcase. My fingers suddenly felt heavier than they had a moment ago. The document had looked so harmless when I signed it. Just another stack of legal papers. I handed it across the desk. Daniel adjusted his glasses. The room became completely silent. Page 1. Then page 2. Then page 3. He read every line. Twice. The only sound was the quiet turning of paper. I watched his face, looking for some sign. Anything. Then he slowly removed his glasses. That frightened me more than if he had shouted, "Mrs. Carter." His voice remained calm. "But I need you to listen very carefully." My heart started pounding. "This document is limited. Very limited." I exhaled in relief. For exactly 2 seconds. Then he continued. "But limited authority is one of the most misunderstood legal documents people sign." I felt my stomach tighten. What does that mean? It means, if someone becomes a little too comfortable, they sometimes start treating permission like ownership. The room suddenly felt much colder. I leaned forward. "Are you saying Lauren can take my retirement?" He shook his head immediately. "No, not legally." The word should have comforted me. Instead, one word echoed inside my head. Legally. If he needed to say legally, then something else was possible. Daniel noticed the fear in my face. "I'm not accusing anyone. I'm simply saying we need facts before assumptions." He reached for another sheet of paper. "I'd like you to do 3 things today." I nodded. "Anything." "First, call your financial advisor. Second, place additional security on every retirement account you own. Third, I want copies of every mortgage document connected to your name." I blinked. "My name?" "Yes." His eyes met mine. "If no one has crossed a line, we'll confirm that." He paused. "But if someone already has, we'll know before it's too late." I left his office with more questions than answers. As I stepped into the parking lot, My phone buzzed again. 5 missed calls. 3 from Lauren. 2 from Ethan. Another message appeared. Mom, please call us. They're refusing to continue without speaking to you. I stared at the screen, then slowly locked my phone. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running toward my daughter's emergency. I was walking toward the truth. And somehow, I had the unsettling feeling the truth was about to be far worse than any of us imagined. The drive home from Daniel's office felt shorter than usual, not because the distance had changed, but because my mind wouldn't stop racing. One sentence kept echoing inside my head. If someone becomes too comfortable, they sometimes start treating permission like ownership. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. No, Lauren wouldn't do that. Would she? The moment I walked through my front door, I placed my purse on the kitchen counter. My cup of coffee from earlier had gone cold. I didn't bother making another one. Instead, I unlocked the fireproof safe again. Every financial document I owned was neatly organized inside. Retirement statements, insurance policies, investment records, tax returns, exactly where they'd always been. At first glance, everything looked normal, until one envelope caught my attention. It had already been opened. I frowned. I never left important mail unsealed. Slowly, I pulled out the papers. It was a copy of an information release form. Across the bottom was my signature. I stared at it. It looked like mine. It was mine, but something about it felt wrong. Not fake, just out of place. I couldn't remember signing this document. My heartbeat quickened. I flipped through the remaining pages. There, in small print near the bottom, was the date. 6 weeks earlier. I closed my eyes. 6 weeks ago, Lauren had invited me over for dinner. She'd mentioned needing a few routine signatures for some insurance paperwork. I hadn't read every page. I trusted her. Now, for the first time in years, I wished I hadn't. Without wasting another minute, I picked up my phone and called my financial advisor. The receptionist answered almost immediately. Good afternoon. This is Anderson Financial. Hello, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. This is Margaret Carter. I'd like to review every recent request made on my retirement accounts. There was a brief pause. Of course, Mrs. Carter. Could you hold for just a moment? Every second felt longer than the last. Finally, another voice came on the line. Margaret? This is Susan. Hearing her familiar voice brought a small sense of relief. I need a favor. Anything. I want to know if anyone has requested information about my retirement accounts recently. Silence. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind that happens when someone is checking something carefully. I waited. Then Susan spoke. Actually, there was one request. My stomach tightened. It wasn't a withdrawal. It was a request for account verification. I frowned. What does that mean? It simply confirms the value of your retirement assets. My heart skipped a beat. Who requested it? Another pause. I'm looking at the file now. It appears. The request was submitted through a mortgage broker. Mortgage. The word hit me like ice water. I never authorized that. Susan sounded confused. According to our records, the paperwork included a signed authorization. I felt the room begin to spin. A signed authorization? Yes. But don't panic. No money has moved. It was only a verification request. Only. To anyone else, it was a routine document. To me, it was proof that my retirement savings had already become part of someone else's plan. I thanked Susan and ended the call. For several moments, I simply sat there. The house was completely still. I wasn't angry anymore. I was disappointed. Not because someone had looked at my finances, but because they had done it without making sure I truly understood what I was signing. Trust isn't destroyed by one enormous lie. Sometimes, it's weakened by 100 tiny assumptions. Before I could gather my thoughts, my phone buzzed again. Lauren. This time, I answered. Mom. Relief flooded her voice. I've been trying to reach you all day. I know. Why didn't you answer? I needed time. She hesitated, then asked the question I had been expecting. So, have you made a decision? How are you? Are you okay? Just a decision. I took a slow breath. Lauren, did you ask someone to verify my retirement account? The line went completely silent. For several seconds, I thought the call had dropped. Then, very quietly, she answered. I thought Ethan had already explained that. My heart sank. Not because she'd admitted it. Because she sounded surprised that I didn't already know. Explain what? It was only paperwork, Mom. We weren't taking anything. The lender just wanted to see that the money existed. You were going to help us anyway. I closed my eyes. There it was. The assumption. Not if I agreed. But when? I opened my eyes and spoke as calmly as I could. I never gave you permission to include my retirement in your mortgage application. Another long silence. Then, for the first time, Lauren's confidence cracked. Mom, I think maybe we should all sit down and talk again. I looked out the window as the evening sun disappeared behind the trees. No, I said quietly. The next conversation won't happen at your dining table. It'll happen after I know exactly how far this has gone. Before she could answer, I ended the call. For the first time in my life, I wasn't protecting my daughter's feelings. I was protecting myself. And somehow, that felt far more difficult. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was afraid. Because my mind refused to stop asking questions. How many papers had I signed without reading? How many conversations had I trusted simply because they came from my own daughter? And the question that hurt the most, when did trust become something that needed proof? The next morning I woke before sunrise. My phone already showed 3 unread messages. All from Lauren. The first one read, Mom, please don't misunderstand what happened. The second, nobody was trying to hurt you. The third was shorter. Can we please fix this before it gets worse? I stared at the screen for a long moment. Funny. Yesterday they wanted my signature. Today, they wanted my forgiveness. Neither would come easily. By 9 o'clock my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Lauren. It was Susan, my financial advisor. Good morning, Margaret. I've reviewed your account history like you requested. I straightened in my chair. And there isn't any unauthorized withdrawal. I exhaled slowly. For the first time in 24 hours, I felt a small wave of relief. Then Susan continued. But my stomach tightened. There are several documents I'd like you to see in person. An hour later, I walked into Susan's office. She greeted me warmly but didn't waste time. A thick folder already waited on her desk. She opened it carefully. Everything here is perfectly legal. She paused, assuming everyone involved understood what they were signing. That sentence immediately caught my attention. She slid the first document toward me. This is the verification request. The second, this is the authorization attached to it. Then, the third. I frowned. I've never seen this one before. Susan nodded. I thought you might say that. It was a summary prepared for the mortgage lender. At the bottom, my retirement account appeared under the heading, Additional Financial Support Available. I read the sentence twice. Then a third time. I never agreed to this wording. Susan nodded quietly. I didn't think you had. She leaned back. Margaret, there's an important difference between providing financial information and promising financial support. I looked up. Are they the same thing? No. But lenders sometimes interpret documents based on the complete application they're given. My pulse quickened. So, what would the lender believe? Susan answered honestly. They would likely assume you intended to participate in helping purchase the home. The room suddenly felt smaller. Not because anyone had stolen my money. Because strangers, people I'd never met, now believed I'd already committed my retirement to someone else's dream. I looked down at the paperwork again. There it was. My name. My savings. My future. Reduced to another line in a financial package. It wasn't theft. It wasn't fraud. Not yet. But it wasn't honesty either. It lived somewhere in the uncomfortable space between assumption and permission. And that frightened me. Susan gently closed the folder. I've already added additional verification requirements to your accounts. No future requests involving your retirement can move forward without speaking directly to you. I smiled for the first time that day. Thank you. You don't need to thank me. She smiled back. You worked 40 years for those savings. My job is to make sure they're still yours. As I left her office, my phone vibrated again. This time, it was Ethan. I almost ignored it. Almost. Finally, I answered. Margaret. His voice sounded different, less confident. I'd really appreciate 5 minutes. I'm listening. He hesitated. I think this situation has gotten bigger than any of us expected. I didn't reply. He continued. I never meant for you to feel cornered. No. No. Then why was the lender already reviewing my retirement before I'd agreed to anything? Silence. Longer this time. Finally, he sighed. We thought. He stopped, then corrected himself. I thought. Once everything was approved, you'd be more comfortable saying yes. There it was. Not anger. Not manipulation. The truth. His entire plan had depended on making the decision feel inevitable. If the mortgage was approved, if the dream house was waiting, if everyone was already celebrating, how could a mother possibly say no? It wasn't force. It was pressure, wrapped in optimism. I spoke quietly. So you were hoping the paperwork would make me feel guilty enough to help? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence confirmed everything. Ethan. I want you to listen carefully. I haven't accused you of committing a crime. But you made one serious mistake. He swallowed. What mistake? You treated my permission as a formality. My permission was supposed to come first. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then he said something I never expected. I think we should all meet. With Daniel, the lawyer. Yes. I don't want any more misunderstandings. I considered his words. For the first time, he wasn't asking me to sign anything. He was asking to explain himself. Maybe that meant he finally understood the seriousness of what had happened. Or maybe he'd simply realized he couldn't fix this alone. Either way, I agreed. Tuesday, 10 o'clock. I'll be there. After hanging up, I stood beside my car in complete silence. The meeting wasn't about saving a mortgage anymore. It wasn't even about retirement. It was about something far more valuable. Trust. And once trust is cracked, the hardest part isn't deciding who was right. It's deciding whether the relationship can ever feel safe again. As I drove home, one thought stayed with me. On Tuesday, the paperwork would finally stop talking. And the truth would have to speak for itself. Tuesday arrived faster than I expected. For 3 days, no one had argued. No one had apologized. No one had tried to fix anything. Lauren sent short messages asking if I was still coming. I answered each one with the same word. Yes. Nothing more. At exactly 9:55 that morning, I parked outside Daniel Brooks' office. I stayed in the car for another minute. Not because I was nervous. Because I knew, whatever happened inside that building, our family would never be the same afterward. I looked at the framed photo sitting on my dashboard. It was taken nearly 15 years ago. Lauren had wrapped her arms around me after my retirement party. She smiled so proudly and whispered, "Mom, you've worked hard enough. Now it's your turn to enjoy life." I smiled sadly. Funny, how quickly people forget promises they once made with love. When I stepped inside the office, Lauren was already there. She stood the moment she saw me. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was quiet, careful, as though she wasn't sure she still had the right to hug me. She took one small step forward, then stopped. I simply nodded. Morning. Nothing more. For the first time in her life, she looked uncertain around me. Ethan arrived a few minutes later. His suit was perfectly pressed, his tie perfectly straight. But his confidence was gone. He avoided my eyes as he sat down. No one spoke while we waited. The silence wasn't angry. It was heavy, like 4 people standing outside a storm, knowing there was no way around it, only through it. Daniel entered carrying a thick file. He smiled politely. "Good morning." No one answered. He sat down, opened the folder, and looked at each of us one by one. I appreciate that everyone agreed to come. His voice remained calm. That tells me something important. Lauren frowned. What? That despite everything, this family still wants answers. He folded his hands together. Before we begin, I'd like everyone to agree on one rule. We looked at him. No interruptions. No accusations. And no speaking for someone else's intentions. He looked toward Ethan. Today, we deal only with facts. Ethan nodded. So do I. Daniel turned the first page. Let's begin with something very simple. He looked at Lauren. When you began looking for a house, did your mother offer to help financially? Lauren answered immediately. No. He wrote something down. Then looked at Ethan. When you included Margaret's retirement information in the application, had she agreed to contribute? Ethan hesitated. No. Another note. Then Daniel looked at me. Mrs. Carter, did you ever verbally promise 85% of your retirement savings? No. 3 questions. 3 answers. Already, the room felt different. Daniel leaned back. Good. Now we're working with facts instead of assumptions. He slid a copy of the mortgage summary into the middle of the table. This document is where everything began to go wrong. Lauren stared at it. So, we broke the law? Daniel shook his head. No. Relief flashed across both their faces. It lasted only a second. Then he continued. But you crossed a boundary. The room fell silent. There's a difference between preparing for someone's generosity and depending on it before they've agreed. Lauren slowly lowered her eyes. I honestly thought Mom would help. Daniel nodded. I believe you. She looked up. Then why does it feel like we've done something terrible? He answered without hesitation. Because good intentions don't erase the consequences of poor decisions. No one argued. Because no one could. For the first time, Lauren turned toward me instead of Daniel. Mom. Her voice trembled. I need to ask you something. I waited. When did you stop trusting me? The question caught me off guard. I thought about it carefully, then answered honestly. I didn't stop trusting you when you asked for my retirement. She looked surprised. I stopped trusting you when I realized you'd already started planning how to spend it. Tears filled her eyes. She didn't try to wipe them away. Ethan finally spoke. I owe you an apology. No speeches. No excuses. Just 5 simple words. I thought, if the mortgage moved forward first, everything else would fall into place. He looked directly at me. I convinced myself I was protecting everyone's future. He lowered his head. I never stopped to ask if I was risking yours. For the first time, his apology sounded real. Not because it was emotional, because it accepted responsibility. Daniel quietly closed the folder. I think all of you are finally talking about the real issue. Lauren frowned. I thought the issue was the mortgage. Daniel smiled gently. No, the mortgage is just paper. The real issue is that somewhere along the way, this family stopped asking permission and started making assumptions. The room became completely silent. Not awkward. Not angry. Just honest. Then, Daniel reached into the folder one last time. There is one more thing. All 3 of us looked up. He placed another document on the table. I requested this yesterday. Ethan frowned. What is it? Daniel looked directly at him. It's the lender's internal notes. My heart skipped a beat. And I think everyone in this room needs to read what they say. No one moved. No one breathed. Because suddenly, the meeting wasn't over. It had only just begun. No one reached for the document. Daniel looked at each of us before finally sliding it toward the center of the table. It isn't confidential anymore, he said quietly. The lender gave me permission to share it. Lauren looked nervous. What does it say? Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he looked at me. Margaret, I think you should read it. My hands felt strangely heavy as I picked up the paper. It wasn't a legal document. It wasn't a contract. Just a page of internal notes. Notes written by someone I'd never met. Someone who only knew us through paperwork. I began reading. Applicant expects financial assistance from applicant's mother. I frowned. The next sentence hit harder. Mother appears willing to contribute retirement assets toward purchase. I looked up. I never said that. Daniel nodded. I know. I continued reading. Then, I reached the final sentence. And suddenly, everything around me disappeared. The room, the voices, even my own breathing. Because the last line read, family expects retirement contribution before closing. Expects. Not hopes. Not discusses. Expects. I slowly lowered the paper. The silence in the room was unbearable. Lauren stared at the floor. Ethan closed his eyes. No one denied what I just read. Because no one could. Finally, I spoke. Very quietly. Is that how you both saw me? Lauren looked up immediately. What? A retirement account. That happened to cook Thanksgiving dinner. Tears instantly filled her eyes. Mom, no. Then tell me. I asked gently. When did I become part of your financial plan? Lauren opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She tried again. I don't know. For the first time since this began. That answer sounded honest. Ethan rubbed both hands across his face. I wrote most of the financial projections. Lauren turned toward him. You what? I thought it would make the application stronger. She stared at him in disbelief. You told me we were only exploring our options. I was. No. Her voice cracked. You were building a future that depended on my mother before she'd even agreed. The room changed. For the first time, Lauren wasn't standing beside Ethan. She was looking at him the same way I'd been looking at both of them, trying to understand how something so wrong had started feeling so normal. Daniel quietly folded his hands. This happens more often than people realize. All three of us looked at him. Not because families are dishonest, but because assumptions have a way of growing. He paused. One person assumes. The second person treats that assumption as a plan. The third person believes the plan has already been approved. He looked around the room. And before anyone notices, everyone forgets to ask the only person who actually owns the decision. Lauren suddenly covered her face. I did this. No, Ethan said quickly. We both did. She shook her head. No. I kept telling myself Mom would never say no. She looked at me. I wasn't asking anymore. I was counting on you. Those words hurt more than any accusation ever could, because they were true. I looked at my daughter for a long moment, then quietly asked, Lauren, if I had needed every dollar of my retirement 5 years from now, what was your plan? She froze. She searched for an answer. Any answer. Nothing came. Finally, she whispered, I never thought that far. I nodded slowly. I know. That was the tragedy. Not greed. Not cruelty. Just never stopping to imagine that I had a future too. Daniel stood and walked toward the window. Without turning around, he spoke. I've spent 32 years practicing family law. I've watched brothers stop speaking. Sisters fight over inheritances. Children take parents to court. He turned back toward us. Almost none of those families started with bad intentions. He paused. They started with unspoken expectations. The room fell quiet again. But this silence felt different. It wasn't full of anger. It was full of understanding. Painful. Honest. Understanding. Then Daniel returned to his chair. Fortunately. He smiled gently. This situation can still be repaired. Lauren looked hopeful. How? Daniel slid the mortgage application back across the table. That depends on one decision. He looked directly at Ethan. You withdraw every document that depends on Margaret's retirement. Then he looked at Lauren. You stop treating her generosity as certainty. Finally, he looked at me. And you. He smiled kindly. Stop apologizing for protecting the life you spent 40 years building. No one spoke, because for the first time, there was nothing left to argue about. Only choices. Real choices. Ethan slowly reached across the table. He picked up the mortgage application. His fingers trembled. Then, without saying a single word, he folded it in half. Once. Twice. Again. Until the thick stack of papers was nothing more than a crumpled bundle in his hands. No drama. No speeches. Just one quiet decision. I'll call the lender today. He looked at me. They'll hear it from me. For the first time in days, I believed him. Not because trust had returned. Trust doesn't work that way. But because, for the first time, he wasn't trying to protect a dream. He was trying to repair the damage it had caused. As we stood to leave, Lauren reached for my hand. She didn't squeeze it. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She simply held it. For a moment, the way she used to when she was little, whenever she was afraid. I looked down at our hands, then back into her eyes, and I realized something. The mortgage had never been the real test. The real test